Thank you guys for coming to tonight's presentation. Like I just said, my name is Amanda. I am one of the registered dietitians here with Functional Nutrition RX. So we're starting our seminar called Kickstart Your Summer, Heart Healthy and Anti-Inflammatory Fuel for Fun. So of course, the first half is going to be a little lab heavy, just going over some good labs to note, some reference ranges for when we get our cardiac labs back. And then we're going to phase that more into fun, applicable tips of how to control heart health and also still have an enjoyable, fun summer as well. So first, we're going to do an overview of heart health, labs, and then tangible tips for summer. So to start, some risk factors for heart disease, of course, diabetes, smoking, altered lab values related to cholesterol or triglycerides, for example. Just for anybody jumping in right now, the session is being recorded. So I just do ask that, and if you're not automatically muted, just to mute, unless you have a question or something, please don't hesitate to ask. In the middle of the presentation, I will also have a section at the end for questions as well. However, other heart disease risk factors can be different dietary habits we'll go into, physical inactivity, genetics, right? But a lot of people say, oh, I'm doomed because of my genes. And it's a little bit of a harsh way of saying this, and I don't like the phrasing exactly, but it does drive the point home, is the expression is the genes load the gun.
Yes, and can you also print one, please, because I have to see.
Sorry, I'm just muting. So the genes load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. So there is some control in there for us as well. Having hypertension or high blood pressure puts us at risk for heart disease, of course, and our environment, right? It could be a high stress environment if we're looking at it from that standpoint, but also different environmental chemicals and things can add stress to the body. So lab values and vitals, let's talk about it. So blood pressure, right? The new blood pressure guidance, there's the new blood pressure guidance. So of course, there you'll see the new category of elevated. So a healthier blood pressure is less than 120 or less than 80, right? When someone's blood pressure starts to go 120 to 129 as the systolic, right? The top number, or the diastolic is even the same. That could be considered elevated, right? Of course, diastolic is more concerning when elevated versus systolic. However, both are important to monitor and provide ample concern if elevated. High blood pressure, though, hypertension stage 1 is going to be 130 to 139. And then you'll start to see that diastolic go up 80 to 89 or about 90. And then true hypertension stage 2, more severe, is when it's above 140 or above 90 in either category. So it's important to check your pressure. I know often some people will go into the doctor and they may experience white coat syndrome, and that's okay. I get nervous when I talk to my doctor too, because there's just so many things I want to go over. But with that being said, if you think you might have white coat syndrome, it's not something to say, oh, okay, this just happens when I'm in the doctor. Test it when you get home. If you can keep like a blood pressure monitor at home, there's some different automatic ones that you could use on the wrist. Of course, that's not as exact as doing your arm, or if you have someone at home that knows how to take a blood pressure, testing it in the morning, doing it for a couple of days, routinely checking in could be a great way to get a true idea of your blood pressure. A lipid profile. So most primary care physicians will run what's called a metabolic panel and a lipid panel. So your lipid panel will include your total cholesterol, your HDL, your triglycerides, your LDL cholesterol, your ratio of total cholesterol to your HDL cholesterol. And sometimes you'll see in there non-HDL cholesterol and like a triglyceride to HDL ratio. You don't see that as often. So your total cholesterol in general, you want it to be under about 200, but we don't want it super low either. We don't want our total cholesterol around 100 milligrams per deciliter because we still need cholesterol to make hormones. So sometimes if people aren't eating enough or their cholesterol is too low, you will see different abnormalities like low testosterone or low estrogen. HDL cholesterol is your good cholesterol. It's like your police officer of the bloodstream. So HDL, you want to have a nice high number, typically below 80 you'll see, but for men and women, it does vary. The overall number is to be above 40 about. So above 40, but still below 80. Because if you're starting to go too high, it could be meaning that your body's mounting some kind of immune reaction. So it's warranted to look into it if it is too high. But it is your good police officer of the bloodstream that goes around to scavenge and grab those LDL cholesterol particles and pass them through the body. So I'm not going to skip trigs, but just while we're talking about LDL on there, of course, it depends on your cardiovascular risk status. However, for the most part, you want to have it under 100 milligrams per deciliter to be in a healthy range, right? Some doctors at certain risks might ask for 70 and below. So it's definitely warranted talking to your cardiologist if you do have other risk factors, if they want you around 70 or just less than 100. Your triglycerides are another type of fat that will be circulating in the bloodstream. We'll get more into this in subsequent slides. Triglycerides, you typically want, depending on the lab and the doctor, you'll see either the goal of being under 150 or 130. I would recommend being under 130 is a good range. Relative risk, if it's 90 to 130, however, ideal is under about 150 is a great place to be, or about under 100 is never bad to be with your trigs. The cholesterol to HDL ratio, all ages should be under about 3.5 when, excuse me. Your cholesterol to HDL ratio should, yes, be about 3.5. But if you're going above, say about a 5.0, that's a higher risk. So when you're looking at all of these, your total cholesterol is often a calculation depending on the lab and the criteria they use. So if your LDL cholesterol is high, it's likely that total cholesterol can also be high, right? So your total cholesterol is often your HDL plus your LDL plus a very low density lipoproteins, and it's more of a total. So if one thing is high, like the LDL, and then say someone has a lot of good cholesterol as well, the HDL, that's likely what's going to push the total cholesterol higher because of the formula that's used to calculate that. So when you look at it in the bloodstream, your HDL is this blue molecule here on the left, and the LDL is this yellow molecule here on the right. So you'll see here, like the HDL circulates the bloodstream and helps to remove that LDL cholesterol. LDL, when it accumulates in the body, is sticky and is what can cause the plaques and atherosclerosis, or that hardening of the arteries, which puts us at risk for stroke or heart disease, ischemia, so lack of oxygen going to the heart, or a heart attack, for example. So all these molecules, I know it gets a little boring and a little nitty gritty here, is it's meant to just show you that there's different particles and particle sizes, right? So you have your VLDL and your LDL cholesterol here, which are a little bit bigger, right? And you have the chylomicron, right? This is the big guy. So this is a type of fat molecule that goes into the bloodstream. And as it becomes more and more specified, it breaks down. And your genetic risk, your food intake, your environmental factors can dictate what type of particles it's breaking down to. So I want to display the lipopolysaccharide A. Lipoprotein A here is small and dense, which we'll move into next and down the road. I'll explain lipoprotein A and lipoprotein B, as some of you might be seeing that on your blood work that we calculate here through Functional Nutrition RX, or even some of your doctor's offices are starting to offer lipoprotein A and lipoprotein B testing. So lipoprotein A is more of like a tight, granular type of fat protein. So you have your LDL cholesterol, like we were going into, your bad cholesterol, right? That can break down even further into lipoprotein A and lipoprotein B, right? So A is more controlled by your genes, what you end up making, right? A versus B. B, you want to think of as like a big marshmallow, like the Michelin Man, right? Where you would think big is bad, but actually in this situation, lipoprotein A is more of a risk factor than having more lipoprotein B molecules, because it's a small granular molecule that can get stuck in places and cause that plaque buildup per se, right? So we actually start building cholesterol by age 5, believe it or not, or buildup of lipoprotein A cholesterol in our circulatory system at a very young age, almost in the form of like a foam. So it tends to build throughout our life. So our heart health does matter throughout our entire life. You usually have your adult level of lipoprotein A at a young age. Diet and exercise may not change your lipoprotein A levels. So that's why some doctors may run this to see, okay, do we need to go more towards lifestyle? Would, recommending certain medications be a route? But it's never bad to try healthy diet, losing weight, quitting smoking, regular exercise, reducing stress, to lower blood pressure and reduce risk of going on medication. Lipoprotein B, like I was saying, is like that big Michelin Man, right? It's more like puffy, but not as sticky, right? So it's less likely to get into those little nooks and cause a buildup of plaque or atherosclerosis in the bloodstream. So if you're more prone to making ApoB, then you have likely a lower risk of developing certain developing heart disease. If it's high, like lipoprotein B can go high during pregnancy. If someone's overall cholesterol is too high, right? If they have nephrotic syndrome or filtering issues with their kidneys, high estrogen can cause higher lipoprotein B, which is why in pregnancy you see it go higher. High caffeine intake can affect it. If it's very low, sepsis or systemic body infection can affect that, liver disease, or low estrogen, right? The opposite of pregnancy. So lipoprotein B is a lipid transporter, just similar to your LDL cholesterol, your VLDL cholesterol. They're all fat molecules that are transporting fat throughout the body, right? You don't want your apoprotein B higher than about 130, however, because it can indicate increased risk for heart disease. If high, natural steps can help to improve that. So like exercising for at least 30 minutes a day, getting plenty of fiber from fruits and vegetables, limiting saturated fats in the diet, maintaining a healthy weight that's right for you, avoiding, of course, tobacco products. And of course, taking a cholesterol lowering medication can help, but we always want to try lifestyle first. So I'm not going to go too much into this because this is more for the cardiologist or on a one-on-one level, but we do offer lipoprotein fractionation here at Functional Nutrition RX. So on top of looking at your total cholesterol, your LDL, the bad cholesterol, your HDL, your triglycerides, right, to look at overall the types of fats in the blood, right? It breaks down even further from lipoprotein A and lipoprotein B to now this on a much more granular level, which is lipoprotein fractionation. So it's showing you the different particle sizes, and this helps the doctor to also determine risk and need for certain medications or how likely lifestyle intervention will benefit the individual and what their risk for having a heart attack is. For more information, of course, you can always check out the Cleveland Heart Lab, or if you have other questions, we can always go into that. Other testing, I personally really like the calcium score a lot because it tells me, all right, if someone has high cholesterol, is that cholesterol just circulating in the bloodstream? Is it sticking? Is it causing hardening of the arteries? How much is there? Like we were saying, it can start to build up in the form of like a foamy plaque at a very young age. The calcium score tells you the total area of calcium deposits and the density of that calcium in your circulatory system. So it's a very straightforward measure. And homocysteine is an amino acid that can build up in the blood vessels and cause damage. If someone has high homocysteine, it's important to look at genetics, right? So if someone has the MTHFR genetics, single nucleotide polymorphism, certain people with that trait, we can call it, are prone to having an inability to properly methylate and absorb B vitamins. So if the body isn't methylating those B vitamins, it tends to accumulate in the form of homocysteine. And if homocysteine is building up, it can cause damage to the blood vessels. So if we see that, we want to often consider a methylated B complex. If you want to check your genetic risks, it's also something that we offer here at Functional Nutrition RX. But yes, a high homocysteine can indicate high risk for heart disease. CRP stands for C-reactive protein. It is a total body inflammatory marker, and it's made in the liver. So if that is high per se, it indicates that there's inflammation somewhere in the body, right? But especially when we start to see very high CRPs, it means that there's an increased risk for heart disease or heart attack because there's so much stress on the body. But it doesn't necessarily say, okay, is the inflammation in the heart? Is it in the GI tract? Is it muscular? Is it pancreatic related? It's not very organ specific. So you would do the CRP test and then can look towards testing other areas of the body to find inflammation. So like you could run a CRP and then run an ESR, which is for, say, intestinal inflammation, if we're curious if it's Crohn's or UC, for example. Development of atherosclerosis, or the hardening of the blood vessel walls from cholesterol and sugar, right, is associated with inflammation. So if someone has a high calcium score, they may have a high C-reactive protein as well. But whole history, of course, needs to be taken into account. Another important measure to take a peek at is visceral fat. So most of your standard in-body machines, or what you would call it, is a body composition, a bioelectrical impedance analysis machine, BIA for short, will test your visceral fat. So visceral fat is a unique type of fat. So it's a fat that actually accumulates around the organs of the body, typically in the midsection. So you'll see that image here on the left. Visceral fat is a different type of tissue than just regular body fat or adipose tissue. Visceral fat actually secretes what's called inflammatory cytokines, like, say, TNF alpha, interleukin 6. Those you don't need to know or memorize. It's more so just to note that it's secreting inflammatory substances or molecules in close proximity to your organs, which adds stress, but also the physical burden of having that on the organs also impacts their functioning. So this is just an example in body I had run, and you'll see, if I could zoom in, here we go. Visceral fat level here, if you see my cursor on the mid right side of the test. For this individual, it was a 10. So on our scale is 10 or under. If you use a Tanita scale, it's considered 12 or under. It's just different units, but it's about the same quantity on the body. So the lower your visceral fat, the better. But just to give perspective, the college kids are typically around like a 3 or a 4 on there. So aiming for a 0 is very tough, but if you don't have access to one of these machines, you can also do your waist circumference. Your waist circumference, yes, it doesn't factor subcutaneous fat, which is just your regular type of fat just below the skin. But if you're measuring your waist circumference and your waist circumference is going up or down, it can likely indicate changes in the visceral fat. What I like about the visceral fat is if you see changes in the visceral fat, like a reduction, for example, it could often indicate a reduced risk for heart disease. Other testing that we'd want to also consider is if someone's having hypertension, increased weight gain out of the blue, cholesterol rise out of the blue, we'd want to look at thyroid. Your thyroid influences the force and speed of your heartbeat, right? Because your thyroid's like your thermostat for the body, all the rates within for your body, right? So force and speed of your heartbeat, blood pressure, cholesterol level, slower liver processing, low thyroid hormone equals a slower heart rate, decrease elasticity of the blood vessels, right? So if the blood vessels are not able to, how I should say, flex, right? If they're very rigid, right? Rigid is a sign of atherosclerosis. Elasticity of the blood vessels allows better movement of blood and oxygen throughout your body. If blood pressure rises in order to circulate blood, it could be a sign of the thyroid, or especially muscle aches and pains too. But a lot of things can factor that. So this is just a cool diagram to show the connection between your thyroid and stress. So if we're very stressed and it's affecting our thyroid, we know the downstream effect is that it can go affecting our heart health, right? So constant stress, thyroid hormone production is revved up and eventually can be reduced when the organ or the gland becomes fatigued, right? Sensitive feedback loops between the brain and the thyroid can be disrupted. And then the most active thyroid hormone is T3, then that can first be decreased, leading to low thyroid hormone. So it's important to look at the whole thyroid panel. Often people will just have TSH and T4 run at their doctor's office, but it's not really telling you the whole story, as your hypothalamus will make thyroid hormone, TRH, and then that tells your pituitary gland to get ready to make thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. From there, T4, and then T3 is made. T3 is one of your more active forms of the hormone that actually is used in the body. When we're stressed, however, TSH production can be suppressed because your body is making cortisol instead, which is our stress hormone that could elevate our blood sugars. This is also another diagram that just goes over stress and heart health. So the changes when you're stressed, your body will send messages via your hormones to your kidneys, on your adrenals to secrete different hormones like cortisol, for example, which increases risk for diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is becoming an epidemic in this country. There's also an inflammatory response when this happens as well. So you would see increases in different like inflammatory cytokines, for example, which can go and cause damage to the body. So this is just a little diagram of so many people that come in for nutritional help. Will see stress as like a big barrier. And some people go, oh, stress, it's just, perceived. It's not really having an effect on my body. Yeah, it makes me unhappy, but it's not really affecting me, is it? These are all examples of how stress impacts our health and well-being. I definitely would recommend taking time to just glance this over, especially when we send out the recordings. And we did send the slides, but I will attach the slides as well with the recording as well when I send out after YouTube processes the video. So stress management tips, right? We want to keep in mind stress isn't always a bad thing, right? A little bit of stress helps to push us to get stuff done, but too much stress can be crippling. We want to talk about our problems, even if we don't think it's going to be solved by talking about it. Sometimes just getting it off your chest and having someone to listen and validate and just to kind of vent for a little bit can also be helpful. We want to prioritize responsibilities. If the stress is becoming so crushing and it's hard to manage your day, or you don't know how you're going to get out of it, it's good to consider mental health treatment. You never know the skills and tips that people can bring to the table that can make a significant impact on our life. Even if it's just an unbiased sounding board, just to bounce thoughts and ideas off of. We don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. We want to time manage our self-care. I often like to recommend actually planning it in, just like how we plan in our workouts, taking our calendar and planning in, when am I going to give myself time to go for a massage, or I want to go for a walk and call a loved one, or go play with the dogs in the backyard. If you're feeling that your schedule is so tight, you have to time manage and prioritize yourself, because if we don't do that for ourselves, no one's going to do it for us. And we have to fill our cup to be able to continue to pour up our cup, because we can burn out. Some supplementation for stress. There's a bunch more than just this, but a good starting point is magnesium glycinate. 5-HTP or different adaptogens, but I always recommend speaking with your dietitian or your doctor about this before just buying a supplement willy-nilly, however. Okay, now let's get more into not just like the labs, but what are we going to do, right? So if total cholesterol is high, LDL cholesterol is high, this first line up here are foods to consider looking at, right? Am I having too much commercially processed baked goods, or even too much homemade baked goods too can have saturated fats in it. Fast food, of course, fried foods, fatty meats. Where that comes from is it's the marbling in the meat, right? So I know often you're trained to pick meat out and look for marbling because the marbling is often the flavor, it's part of the flavor, it's the fat, right? So if we do really enjoy that, grass-fed meats can be a way to go because the saturated fats start to reduce and the omega-3s start to increase when the feed of the animal is more optimized and they get to roam and graze on a larger amount of land. Also, you'll see vitamin A and vitamin E go up. So if we are going to have a fattier meat like filet mignon, even though you don't see all the marbling in filet mignon, what makes filet mignon is that the marbling is so even throughout. That's why you can often cut through it without a knife for good filet mignon. High fat dairy is the same thing with fatty meats. It's just the high fat animal meats, especially if it is from a feedlot animal, you're going to see more saturated fats, which increase that propensity for elevated cholesterol. Processed meats, the same concept, high in saturated fats. But I think where this image needs to up the ante a little more is displaying that sugar also can contribute to elevated cholesterol as well. Triglycerides. Your triglycerides are going to come about more from like sugary foods and beverages, foods made with like white flour, for example. Of course, your saturated and trans fats, just in general, for any of your risky lipids, right? Cholesterol, triglycerides is going to be something to warrant avoiding and reducing. Alcohol is a big when someone's triglycerides are very high, it's usually indicative that there could be alcohol in the picture, or some of these processed foods. It could also just be overportioning, and eating too big of a portion can trigger elevated triglycerides as well. That's why it's such an individualized condition, heart disease, to look at what is factoring for the individual. So what should I be watching out for? So when you're reading the labels, like say your peanut butters, we often like to recommend going for more like a natural peanut butter, like a Justin's or a Smucker's Natural or the Trader Joe's store brand, for example, because you're cutting out the processed hydrogenated vegetable oils like safflower oil, soybean oil, corn, cottonseed. Canola always goes back and forth for people. It's just how processed it is in this country. It's not necessarily that the canola plant is bad, it's that it's just so over processed. Highly recommend olive oil. Olive oil has been shown to reduce risk for stroke as well as reduce risk for hypertension. Olive oil is rich in antioxidants and also loaded in monounsaturated fats, same as avocado oil, but olive oil has just a little more antioxidants in it. However, if you're cooking greater than 400 degrees or so, you want to go more towards avocado oils because it has a higher smoke point and won't burn as quickly as olive oil. Olive oil, of course, if you're doing like an extra virgin, you really don't want to go heating that too much. Virgin, you can get away with a little bit more heating. When looking at the vegetable oils, the reasoning is that it's higher in omega-6s, which omega-6s are inherently more inflammatory in the body, and you want to have a greater ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s, which I'll go into later on. High sodium foods, of course, we know eating too much salt, but it's also not, salt always gets like a bad rap. It's salt from processed foods, right? But also looking at the person's potassium intake. It's an inverse relationship. So if we're not getting enough potassium, that can also affect getting our blood pressure, right? So when you're looking at the sodium in the food labels and you're not exercising a lot, say, you're not sweating a lot, and say we're not super hydrated. Of course, we got to watch sodium in the foods. So the little ism for foods that we don't really want, or nutrients that we don't want to have a lot of, that's on the food label, 5 is fine, 20 is plenty. And that's in reference to when you're looking at the percent daily values or the percent DV on the right-hand column of the food label. So if it's closer to 5%, awesome, okay. But if it's closer to 20, okay, I'm going to use caution. This is like a special occasion kind of a food. The goal is somewhere between 1,500 and 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. It depends on the individual's need. A regular healthy individual, you want to try to keep sodium under 2,300, but as risk for heart disease or hypertension surfaces, you're going to move closer to 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. However, this is a very individualized RDA, or recommended daily allowance. Foods high in saturated fat, that same ism, 5 is fine, 20 is plenty, applies with foods high in saturated fat. I'm a little more conservative, I'm going to be honest. So the slide I had put together says greater than 5 grams saturated fat per 100 grams of food. Yes, or in general, if someone likes just like a hard fast, like easy number to stick to, try to avoid servings greater than 2.5 or 3 grams of saturated fat, especially in like a snack. Common culprits are, like we were talking about earlier, our fatty meats, our fatty dairy, right? Poultry with the skin. So think like chicken wings, butter that isn't, grass fed, especially, whole milk, and the tropical oils that we went into, lard and Crisco, of course. Saturated fats are solid at room temperature, right? Versus mono or polyunsaturated fats, similar to like olive or avocado oil, they're more liquid at room temperature. So that's also your tell. Coconut oil is still considered a saturated fat, and there's been limited evidence to show that it has a significant difference in how it's metabolized in the body compared to other saturated fats. Yes, it's an MCT oil, which affects how it's absorbed, but I'm coming from a heart health standpoint, not a GI standpoint. Foods high in added sugars, right? So sugars can also increase that hardening of the artery, right? Think of when you make like a caramel, right? It's like buttery and sugar, and how it creates that hard, sticky substance, which is similar to how I like to explain like plaque in the arteries, right? So especially when the two come together, it can cause that kind of inflammatory plaque. So we want to try to keep it in the single digits when you're looking at the food label in general for sugar. Added sugar as low as you possibly can. But sugar coming from like fruits, right? 2 to 3 fruits a day is usually not the devil for most people, especially when that fruit is paired with a protein and or healthy fat. Other questions that tend to come about is how much added sugar is okay. So foods like honey count as added sugar, right? Agave counts as added sugar, but so does table sugar, sugar in the raw, right? It all breaks down to glucose. So for women, you don't want to have more than 6 teaspoons worth of sugar or 24 grams of sugar. I sometimes think it's easier to just go based on grams. And for men, we want to aim for less than 9 teaspoons or 36 grams of added sugar. The lower, the better. And the most common culprits you'll see in the American diet is sweetened beverages like coffee, tea, juice, soda, energy drinks, candies, processed foods, snacks. So what's the deal with cholesterol in food? This girl's talking so much about saturated fats and like sugars and things, but what about, doesn't cholesterol equal high cholesterol? That's actually become a misnomer, right? So as of a few years ago, the dietary cholesterol was actually taken off the nutrient list of concern, which includes foods like sugar and saturated fats, for example. So the dietary cholesterol does not correlate with serum cholesterol, right? So it's like saying eating dietary fat equals body fat, right? So if I eat this avocado, it's going to turn into body fat. I mean, if it's in a calorie surplus, sure, but overall, no. So available evidence shows no applicable relationship between consumption of dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol. So with that being said, this is where the whole egg conundrum came from. Eggs do contain a lot of dietary cholesterol, but they also do, depending on where they come from, contain about 5 grams of saturated fat. That changes, however, if you get more what's called, I'm going to try to enunciate well, pasture raised. I'm not saying pasteurized, I'm saying pasture raised. So if you're getting pasture raised eggs or free range eggs, that saturated fat content, similar to grass-fed meat, goes down and omega-3s go up. So more anti-inflammatory versus pro-inflammatory. The white is really just the protein and the yolk is the fat. So that's often why people will recommend egg whites for those with elevated cholesterol or just trying to lose weight, just to cut the calories from the yolks. A general recommendation is to limit eggs up to 6 eggs per week. However, it really depends on the person and the type of eggs they're buying, the source of saturated fat in other places in the diet, and how much that's contributing to their protein needs. The best tip is to combine like 1 or 2 whole eggs with egg whites and vegetables in the morning or a side of fruit so that you're getting fiber, protein, especially if those eggs are pasture raised, you're getting some healthy fats with that as well. I will tell you, do not waste a penny on cage-free eggs. Cage-free is just a marketing scam. That means the door was open for, or the cage was open for 2 hours. It doesn't mean that the chicken really even jumped out. And it doesn't really change nutrient quality of the egg. So that's something to consider. The brand that I really like to recommend is Vital Proteins, or Vital Farms, my apologies, Vital Farms. But you could also check out local farms. There's plenty of farms here on Long Island that you might check out that might be around your neighborhood and see, where the eggs come from. Of course, always, make sure it's a clean and free of disease place, right? But getting your local eggs, you'll see that the yolk is more of like a deep orange horizon versus like an Eggland's Best, which is like a dull yellow. And the color of our food really does play a role into the nutrient quality of it, right? So it's a vibrant orange horizon because there's more vitamin E and vitamin A in there, and those colors show up in the food. Metabolic syndrome. Actually, I wanted this slide a little earlier on. Metabolic syndrome is a cluster of 5 conditions that lead to heart disease, diabetes, and stroke, increased risk for cancer, for example, as well. So it's a conglomerate of elevated fasting glucose or blood sugar, having low HDL cholesterol, having high triglycerides, having a larger waist circumference for women greater than 35 inches or greater than 40 inches for men, because we're looking at that visceral fat, right? And having hypertension. So having even 3 of these increases our risk for heart disease. So now, with all of that being said, what to cut out, right? Like, what should I add in? What's good for me? So of course we want to increase those heart healthy fats. Think like salmon, tuna, especially the smaller mouth fatty fish like anchovies and sardines. They're loaded in omega-3s, olive oil, nuts and seeds, most nuts and seeds. We want to stay away from like dry roasted, of course. 1 ounce serving of unsalted nuts per day can be beneficial for lowering LDL cholesterol. Even a tablespoon of olive oil a day can reduce our risk. And then of course we want to fill up on fiber. Fiber comes from plants, right? It comes from our carbs. Now, often when people hear carbs, they think of breads and starches. I think I probably say this at least 4 times a day now. Carbs are our fruits and vegetables as well, right? Your starchy carbs can be like beans and legumes, even though they do have protein, whole grains and starchy vegetables, peas, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and squash, right? And they all contain fiber and are good parts of the diet. Nuts and seeds, although they are a fat, they're also a plant that grows from the ground that does have some carbs in them, right? So those foods, when eaten together as a part of a healthy diet, helps to increase our fiber. And fiber will act as like a netting almost to trap different fats or sugars somewhat and pass it through the body. It also helps to make us feel full, aid in digestion, and a whole slew of benefits. So fiber foods like oatmeal, if we are cereal people, Cheerios or Catalina Crunch. Chia seeds are better than most fiber supplements and have more fiber than most fiber supplements and are a lot cheaper. About 1 to 2 tablespoons a day can be about 10 grams of fiber, when like broccoli, which is a very high fiber food, is barely like 5 grams of fiber in a serving. So adding the chia seeds in also adds a touch of omega-3s, aside from the fiber, and a touch of protein. So it's more of like what you would call a superfood. So adding chia seeds to your breakfast in the form of putting on a Greek yogurt parfait, in a smoothie, in oatmeal, in protein pancakes, just to name a few, is a great way to supplement in some fiber from a whole food source that also packs a punch in other ways. All right, I'm ready to make diet and lifestyle changes. Where do I begin? We have to start simple. So if our LDL cholesterol is high, we want to focus on increasing dietary fiber, maybe focus on adding one new food or increasing the volume of one food a day, like the chia seeds, oatmeal. I always get a million questions on, is oatmeal healthy? It's a carb. I hear such a conflicting thing about it on social media. Social media is a great place to get inspiration, but not a great place to get answers. So oatmeal is more of a complex carb, meaning that it contains fiber, right? And often is fortified with nutrients like iron, for example. Oatmeal by itself is not going to be as filling as if it's part of a balanced meal, right? So I'm going to say that cliche term, balanced meal. Now, what I mean by a balanced meal is that the meal contains, like a fruit or a vegetable, a fat, a protein, and a complex starch, like a whole grain, like oatmeal. So oatmeal eaten by itself, or even with just fruit, it's just a carb and a carb, right? So it's not really balanced. But if we have oatmeal as a part of a balanced meal with maybe, I love putting some protein powder in there. I love the Ascent protein powder, maybe some chia seeds, some berries. Awesome. So now it's more of a balanced meal. I'm getting fiber from the fruit. I'm getting fat from the chia seeds and omega-3s and fiber, and I'm putting protein in. So it's going to reduce my glycemic spike from the oatmeal, keep me fuller longer, and the oatmeal is going to give me fiber to help trap some of that cholesterol and pass it through the body. Certain cereals, yes, it's true that Cheerios does have a heart health benefit to it, but often people will overconsume cereal because they just put it sometimes with like milk and maybe fruit. So it's not really with a significant source of protein or fat. And then because of that, we're more prone, I find, to over portion that cereal because we're not feeling full off fat and protein. So we increase the portion of the carbs to feel more full. So I really like the Catalina Crunch brand. It's a little less processed than some other brands. It's low in sugar and elevated in protein and fiber if we are going to have a cereal. However, smoothies are amazing breakfast options for most people. And the difference between a smoothie and a juice is the smoothie keeps the fiber in, which helps our blood sugars, even though it's getting broken down a bit by the blender. But then we definitely need to add fat and protein in there as well. Smoothies can be a great source of fiber by adding the chia seeds, by adding greens in, or I love doing frozen cauliflower. I know that sounds kind of weird, or cauliflower rice. You don't really see it and you don't really taste it. And then the color of the smoothie gets dictated typically by the fruit. So it's kind of like a little hidden gem in your breakfast. Talk to your doctor or your dietitian about the trace minerals fiber supplement as well. It's a whopping 14 grams of fiber in the form of inulin, however. We want to increase fish intake to about 2 servings per week of fatty fish, salmon, tuna, anchovy, sardines, and increase nut intake to about 1 ounce portion per day, again, avoiding dry roasted and salted nuts. LDL lowering hacks, watch your oils, like we were talking about earlier, aim for avocado, olive oil, ghee, grass-fed butter, or like clarified butter. Okay to use spray if it's like an avocado oil spray or an olive oil spray with no other major ingredients. I like it when we make our own with the spray bottle instead that you can get from like TJ Maxx in glass, just because they add a lot of chemicals to it that can disrupt our hormones. Add beans to your chili. I cannot underestimate the fiber in beans. There's about 10 to 15 grams of fiber in about 1 cup of beans. So just to give perspective, women need about 28 grams of fiber or more, and men need about 35 grams of fiber or more. So if you have a cup of beans, say 15 grams, and you have 1 to 2 tablespoons of chia seeds, wow, I'm already pretty much there for the day. And then add in fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, and then you're soaring above the fiber recommendations, which most Americans only get about like 11 grams a day. And increasing your fiber is linked with reducing risk for most chronic health conditions, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, you name it. Some fun swaps is the classic New York bacon, egg, and cheese. I would be lying to you to say that bacon, egg, and cheese is not my favorite food. It is. The way to optimize it, you could do 2 slices of whole grain bread, sprouted grain, sourdough bread, right? With like 1 egg and a couple egg whites, or just, keep it simple. If you're ordering from the deli and where your audience, 2 eggs, maybe a slice of sharp cheddar cheese or Swiss cheese, some avocado, some tomato on there, call it a day. An even better option is 1 slice of whole grain bread with 3 egg whites, tomato, and about 1/3, or I would say 1/4 to 1/2 of an avocado, right? That could be another option to make a nice healthy swap for this summer. We have Heart Smart Foods. Often pizza is a common thing you'll see. I remember like walking the boardwalk in Dewey in Delaware, the pizza shops all around, right? So pizza is a common thing that gets tempted our way. And of course, what always comes with it, a soda of some kind. So of course, reframing and trying to optimize and get a different meal can always be an option. But if you're trying to make peace with your craving and honor your craving, but make the meal a little healthier, we could do like a slice of pizza. I don't really recommend the pepperoni, especially. It's higher risk for colon cancer because it's a processed meat and it's high in saturated fat, but really doing more so like chicken on the pizza, or doing a salad slice if you can, or doing a side salad with some chicken can be good, because then you're feeling more full off the salad and the chicken that's taking up space in your stomach. That helps to prevent us from going towards that second slice of pizza. And then of course, instead of the Coke, I get it, if people want flavor, maybe doing an unsweetened tea with a little lemon instead. Of course, another Heart Smart food, a common thing that we see around this time of year, it's like barbecues, sweets, and booze, right? So the ice cream is a common thing with the ice cream truck. So what's the mystery dessert between using 1 pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream? It's portion control. Like when in doubt, like if you really, really want something, of course we could swap it for like a Yasso bar, nice cream, or use the Ninja Creamy and, make our own homemade option. But if you're in a situation, when in doubt, you can always portion as well and reduce the portion size. Back to basics with the beverages, of course. Better beverages to avoid is to avoid drinking our sugar, right? So one thing I love to do is when someone's going to like a place like Sobel a lot and with intentions to eat healthy, is like looking at the grams of sugar on the label and say like the Minute Maid lemonade, it's 57 grams of sugar. If I divide that by 4 grams of sugar equals 1 teaspoon. That is 14¼ teaspoons going into that. So I just love to highlight the 1 teaspoon of sugar equals 4 grams concept for especially when you're reading labels. Better options. I love Ultima here, the electrolyte powder. You can have about 1 to 3 of those a day because it's about 100 milligrams of magnesium in each one. So we don't really want to go too far above the recommended daily allowance of 350 milligrams a day of magnesium. However, it's technically a bad electrolyte in that it's low in sugar and low in salt. So it gives you the option to make it a good electrolyte substance if you want for a hot day in the summer. You add a pinch of Celtic sea salt to it, and then maybe a shot glass or 2 of like the pomegranate juice or 100% blueberry juice or tart cherry juice if you're actively exercising outside. But if you just want a flavor and to keep you away from, say, like the Minute Maid lemonade, you can get the lemonade flavor of the Ultima. Even less is the True Lemon. The True Lemon is really just like lemon juice and lemon oil. There's not a lot of electrolytes in there. Zevia, Poppy is another brand of like the soda alternatives I've been seeing. I like LaCroix a lot in terms of the seltzers. Hint, the Pure Leaf or Honest tea brands are good, especially if you're on the go and you're on the beach and everyone's drinking, and you want to have a healthier alternative, you could do that. There's another beverage that I've found since making this presentation. It's called Recess. Christina actually showed me it. It contains, I think, about 55 milligrams of magnesium in it, and it's like a nice seltzer that's meant to be relaxing. Of course, homemade is always ideal. So these are just some fun mocktails that you guys have access to with the slides in your email, that essentially we're using like coconut water as like an electrolyte replacement. So if you want to cut some of the sugar, you can, and use like a seltzer or a water instead. What about alcohol, right? So alcohol impacts our liver's ability to digest and absorb other nutrients, right? Because our body prioritizes getting rid of it because it's a toxin, essentially, right? And it burdens the liver because now the liver has to work to get rid of the alcohol. And then the liver still has to process, our medications or the toxins we take in terms of the chemicals in our food, our beauty supply, our cleaning supplies. So it just creates greater burden on the body. The recommended daily allowance for Americans, for women, is one beverage or one serving per day. Men, it can be up to 1 to 2. However, recent research has shown that really there's no major benefit from having alcohol that you can't get from doing something else, right? Like, so people like to talk about the stress relief from it, or the anthocyanin in it, right? So we can de-stress in other ways, right? That one, it just contributes a lot of added sugar to our diet often as well, and reroute that habit of the nightcap at night. Listen, I get it. And reroute it towards something else, right? Like reading, stretching, meditation, calling a loved one. No matter what, I love to just go outside and throw the ball for my dogs and just watch them play. That could always de-stress me no matter what's going on. But it depends, every person's different. Also, with that being said, if we can just optimize the portion, if someone's having 2 to 3 beverages a night, can we have 1 to 2 beverages a night? And it's important to note what counts as a serving, right? So 5 ounces of wine, 1.5 ounces of a spirit or about a shot glass, right? 8 ounces of malt liquor or a 12-ounce beer is 1 serving. The wine gets us for most of us. Healthier options, emphasis on is of course the red wine, because you're at least getting some phytonutrients like the anthocyanin or resveratrol, depending on how the wine's made. But again, you can get that in other produce like grapes, for example. Bloody Mary, it's because of the tomatoes and the other nutrients that are coming in. It's not necessarily like the alcohol is healthier though. Margarita, mojito, especially if it's made from scratch, we're not taking in as much of the added sugars, and at least there's the basil in it and the herbs, right? Vodka soda is at least a little lighter. Same with the martini with the olives, at least we're getting some healthy fat with it. Spiked seltzers tend to be a little leaner, and they're also pre-portioned, which is really nice. Non-alcoholic or low-carb beer like Athletic Brewing Company's beer. A couple of other places have come out with it, like the Heineken Zero. It still contributes added calories in a beverage form, however, but it's better than having the alcohol. A spiked smoothie, because at least we're getting the electrolytes and the antioxidants from the nutrients in the smoothie. Getting saucy. So often you see it this time of year, like I said, it's barbecues, sweets, and booze, right? So sauces are common at barbecues. We love the GF Hughes sugar-free barbecue sauce. That's another great brand. Primal Kitchen is another good brand to consider. We can try to swap out sour cream for Greek yogurt or avocado, especially if it's made more fresh, or I'll use the holy guacamole, like plain pre-packs if I'm really nervous about it oxidizing too much. Swap out shelf-stable salad dressings for refrigerated or homemade ones, like taking apple cider vinegar with a little lemon and some olive oil, maybe some fresh herbs, and making your own. You can swap French onion or ranch dip out for guacamole or hummus. Or I'll be honest, my fiance really loves the French onion dip, especially around football season. So I'll just swap it with about like a 0% Greek yogurt, or 2% is more ideal. I've accidentally done higher fat percent Greek yogurts with it and it gets way too thick and not so fun. And if a diabetic, aim for low sugar of course, options like the GFUs. These are some great brands that you could check out that many stores do have that you can take a peek, especially Target will have it, Whole Foods, but you have access to these in your slides. Barbecue proteins, these are some better options. I'm never really going to go recommending the hot dog, however, but if someone's going to have a hot dog, a farm fresh made one is great, or Hebrew National if you're stopping at a classic food store. The leaner the beef, the better. If you can get closer to 90-99% lean beef, or sirloin burger, if it ends in loin, round, or chop, tends to be a leaner option. However, I'd rather someone opt for like the turkey burger, the salmon burger, the chicken burger, for example, or doing a black bean burger, because the black beans will have a little bit more protein than a classic veggie burger. Barbecue buns, these are just some brands. I'm a fan of the Dave's Killer brand bread buns the most. As you can compare the nutrients, there's a little bit more fiber in them compared to others, lower in sugar, lower in total carbs. The 647 burger buns are also a good brand to consider. You could also do a portobello mushroom bun, a lettuce bun, for example, as well, or do bunless and make it like a hamburger salad, for example. Barbecue sides, beans, I love recommending like homemade bean salad, but if we want to get something bought out, the Bush's original baked beans that are lower in sugar would be the ones to avoid. There's some that are much higher in sugar. This one's still a little more high than what I feel comfortable with, 12 grams. Personally, I like to just take the 3 different types of beans, like a chickpea, a black bean, and a kidney bean, mix it with some olive oil and some fresh herbs. I love putting that on the side or having that prep for the week to add as a topper for salads, for example, or to add to protein bowls. Homemade coleslaw can be a great option to consider as a healthy barbecue side. Homemade potato salad, corn on the cob. However, your recipe packets are going to have other healthy sides as well, like a quinoa salad, for example. When we're on the beach or on the boat, we want to try to plan ahead. So for stopping at the classic Long Island deli, like stopping at TJ's before going on the drive-on beach at Smith's Point, for example, we want to try to swap out hero rolls for lower carb options. Everyone always wants to jump to the wrap. Wraps aren't necessarily less carbs than breads per se, right? Because I can have a wrap that's bigger than my face or a wrap that's about the size of my face, right? And could have a varying amount of carbs. So 15 grams of carbs is equivalent to about 1 slice of bread. So if the wrap is like 45 grams of carbs, then it's like three slices of bread, right? So sometimes I'd rather someone just get 2 slices of whole grain bread and, you know, a lean protein or some eggs on there, for example. You want to choose, if you're going to have cold cuts, low sodium, nitrate free, nitrite. Boar's Head, Applegate are nitrite free. So that's pretty awesome. Pack mini bags of snacks to keep portions of. So like the Benito's black bean chips are great to dip with some guacamole or some salsa with like a low fat cheese stick on the side. I really like the hip peas. It's like a chickpea cheese doodle. So it has good crunch and lots of different flavors. Catalina Crunch is not just a cereal brand, but they even have like a trail mix that has like 20 grams of protein in it that mimics the cheddar Chex Mix. Of course, packing trail mix that doesn't have a lot of chocolate in it because it might melt is always something to consider as some healthy snacks to bring along. But I think it's the biggest thing is just to plan ahead and just think about it even before we go, so that we're not stuck up a creek without a paddle. We want to ditch the like processed chips, right? So if it's like Benito brand, good food should taste good, and you have it paired with a protein under a healthy fat, or like a cowboy caviar, that's different. But if it's more of like a Ruffles or potato chips, for example, we want to ditch that and pack like fresh fruit. I love packing like veggies in a dip. So you could even take from the last slide here, when we first talked about sauce, like the Bolthouse brand here, they replace the cream with Greek yogurt to make all different like flavors and options. So you can always do that as a dip or a homemade option with your veggies. I like hummus a lot, or chocolate hummus with like banana or strawberries, for example, or apples. Tzatziki is also a great option because many people don't know that tzatziki is actually Greek yogurt with dill and lemon, so fresh herbs, and making it help more of an anti-inflammatory dip, but also a probiotic that has a touch of protein from the Greek yogurt. Water, pack plenty of water, consider electrolytes like the Ultima. Sun protection, bring an active game. So we're not just like, so we're staying physically active and movement conscious. Cornhole even, right? Frisbee, football, going and flying a kite, right? Things to keep active on the beach. Spike ball, a floaty for treading water while boating is always fun. And of course, like if you have a summer reading goal, bringing a good book is always great for stress relief. When you're at a barbecue or social engagement in general, we want to avoid our holiday hiccups, right? So we want to avoid saving calories and, not having breakfast and waiting for the big event, or if it's a dinner that, skipping lunch so that we can be hungry for dinner, it always ends up blowing back at us. So you want to try to maintain our normal routine, because if I'm super hungry going into that meal or going into that holiday party, I'm more likely to graze and overconsume and feel really stuffed and uncomfortable. And I can easily take in more calories than if I had just spread my eating out by eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, and 1 to 2 snacks. We want to check out all the options first when we're there. I always joke around, say, do a lap, see what's there. It's like when you're at a buffet and you hold off for this, you grab the chicken because the steak's all the way at the end, and then you end up grabbing the steak and the chicken. If hosting, serve vegetables first. It's a concept called volumetrics. So you start to fill up more on veggie-based foods like salads, for example, because it has some fiber and some water in there as well, versus just drinking a glass of water and hoping it will fill us. Where the water helps with satiation is if your hypothalamus tells you you're hungry, you're thirsty, you're tired, right? But those communication lines can get crossed sometimes. So with that being said, if we're dehydrated, we can often think that we're hungrier than we really are, but it's not that it necessarily like fills our stomach, if that makes sense. Eat off a plate instead of, grazing off a napkin, of course. Everything with like a spoon or a fork is always a good little rule of thumb. So it helps us to stay mindful of what we're actually having. Because if I eat off a napkin, I can polish off a few things and not even really register that it was even consumed, right? Very easily. You want to offer to bring something, of course, always good manners, right? An appetizer, dessert, a side dish. I always like to say BYOHO, bring your own healthy option. So one of the recipes that you're going to get in the recipe packet today could be one. I love making like a quinoa salad with chickpeas and fresh parsley and lemon and olive oil. And I'll throw in like some cut up bell peppers or some broccoli in there. So I also know that if I'm going to an event, if they don't really have the healthiest options, at least I can lean on what I brought, if that makes sense. But I'm also being a crowd pleaser by bringing something that, to bring something to the table. Of course, you can always focus on baking versus frying, or I should really say grilling is a great option. We just want to avoid the Maillard reaction, too much of the blackening and the charring of the meats that can get stuck more in the intestines, that Maillard reaction. And that's what really puts us at risk for colon cancer. But when you marinate your meats in anti-inflammatory oils like olive oil, avocado oil, it can reduce that, especially if you're having fresh herbs on there too. So you're adding more anti-inflammatory nutrients into the mix. You, of course, want to avoid using, too much butter, mayo, sour cream. And we want to check out the healthified recipes that are going to be in the email. When in doubt, if you're at an event, stick to your food groups, right? You want to try to make your plate at least 1/4 to 50% of the plate a non-starchy vegetable. So all vegetables except for peas, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and most squash are going to fit in that category, right? All those vegetables that I didn't mention. Then comes the carbohydrate foods. This is what confuses everybody. So that's where your starchy vegetables are going to go. That's where the peas, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and most squash go. Zucchini, summer squash, spaghetti squash, those are actually non-starchy, and those you can eat as much as you want as long as it doesn't make your belly hurt. What also goes in your carbohydrate food section, aside from those starchy vegetables, is like beans and whole grains, right? Like quinoa and brown rice. Your protein foods are going to be here. You want to aim for about 1/4 of your plate of protein, or about size of your palm to your hand about. And you want to aim for proteins that swim, fly, grow from the ground. And now I've recently added to my ism, those that eat grass. You still want to try to keep red meat under about two times a week. There is a moderate to strong, there's a strong link between processed meat and colon cancer. And there's a moderate link between red meat in general and colon cancer. So aiming to keep it 2 times a week or less, whether it's grass-fed or not, is always a good rule of thumb, because one, it cuts calories too, because red meat's going to have a little extra calories if we're focusing on weight alleviation. But also it's the red meat interacts with our bugs in our gut, and we love those bugs in our gut, but sometimes there's the not so great ones. And when they go to eat at that meat in the stomach, it creates a byproduct, right? So those bugs give off byproducts just like us. They burp and give off what's called TMAO in response to consuming red meat. And when TMAO, that molecule accumulates in a large amount in the colon, it can increase risk for colon cancer. So of course, the saturated fat is the reason why we're careful about the red meat, but also if it's feedlot or red meat, and if we have a family history of colon cancer, we've had numerous, polyps, it's something to definitely consider. Avoid holiday hiccups. All right, making and buying too much, right? It always comes from a good place. I don't want to run out. I want to make sure I have enough for all my guests. But the problem is the leftovers, right? So if we do make or buy too much, you want to make sure that you're sending people home with some leftovers if you can, because it's what turns into next weekend, right? Of course, if you can try to portion out what you make, that's great. But we want to also treat our body with more respect than the trash can. I have a lot of individuals that will say, oh, I want to eat it instead of throwing it out. And I get it. Like, we all grew up with the ism of, they're starving kids, insert country location here. So I got to finish everything on my plate. But it kind of takes us away from honoring our own cues. And we're not doing anybody good by finishing off the half of pie that's left over. If you can donate it, great. If you can repurpose it, great, but it's not going to really help much people. So you can, throw that out if you cannot repurpose it. Use smaller plates, right? 8.5-inch paper plates instead of 10 and 1/16. There is research to validate smaller plates lead to smaller food consumption, smaller portions, I should say. Better beverage choices. What's in sight is in mind, right? So if you put better things in sight, we're more likely to grab it. Something to also consider is alcohol intake can lower our inhibitions and quickly add up the calories in sugar, not just from the alcohol, because it's 7 calories per gram, in perspective to carbs and protein that are 4 calories per gram, and dietary fat that's 9 calories per gram. So it is on the denser side, but also it's the concept of when we have that euphoric feeling from the alcohol, sometimes we're a little bit more likely to go towards those, munchy food options. Stay hydrated, especially if you are sodium sensitive, just to help prevent. It sounds weird that you're adding water to help reduce water retention, but yes, especially when we consume sodium, it helps to actually get rid of the water that we might be holding on the body. And we want to take it slow and savor, take our time to eat. When we eat slower, we tend to consume smaller portions. Social pressure or food pushers. I've come from a big Sicilian family, so saying no is sometimes considered rude, I've learned when I was growing up, but you learn how to navigate it and navigate that people's emotions sometimes get tied to the food that they create. So it's a little bit of a dance sometimes that you have to say, no, thank you, but genuinely thank you. I really appreciate it. It looks awesome. If it's someone that you feel comfortable with saying, hey, I'm really trying to make healthful changes for my for my well-being. If I eat this, it's really, it's not something my doctor really wants me having. You could also, you don't have to share, your personal goals depending on the person, but you can maybe say, oh, your apple pie looks delicious. I'm really just too full. And if I eat something else, I'm not going to feel good, but I'd love to take some home with me if there's leftovers, or I'd love to get the recipe. So you're still kind of flattering them in a sense, but also, setting that boundary for you too. You can compliment the dish, but I'm really too full. is another thing just to say. Travel tips. So this is a time we all tend to go on vacation. So number one rule is stress is just as bad for you. So eat the cheeseburger when in doubt, right? Like if you really never have it and you want to give yourself, a splurge, it's something you've been craving for a while and you don't normally eat it, go for it. You're on vacation how often? But I've seen people that when they retire and they, if you go on vacation like every other month, we can't apply that mindset. But we want to try to avoid stressing on vacation for sure. Packing snacks. I think considering your day is the biggest thing. If I'm going to be out and about for 6 hours, I want to definitely make sure I have some snacks, and I plan to have, say a breakfast and a lunch, or knowing when my next meal is supposed to be coming about. These are some snacks that you can consider, but are not limited to. Consider your timelines, meal timing, and at meals, at least try to prioritize the 2 Ps, protein and produce, meaning fruits and veggies. Utilize grocery stores and meal prep services. I love just doing an Instacart order to the hotel or the Airbnb, depending on where we're going to be, right? Or easier, stopping at the grocery store on your way, to the hotel or the Airbnb, just to pick up some quick breakfast items if the hotel doesn't have it, and some snacks on the go. Always bring a water bottle. It could be like a metal stainless steel water bottle that you can fill up, or depending on where you are, you might have to get a case of water bottles, but we want to avoid the plastic water bottles because of the microplastics. If you're on a road trip, pack a cooler, some sandwiches, some fruit, some snacks. Prevents us from stopping and buying the overpriced snacks at the rest stops, and also the more tempting things like the combos. Prioritize rest, plan ahead, and mindful movement is something to consider on vacation. Even if you're getting up and just going for a walk, or the hotel has a gym. I like packing resistance bands, or like my TRX, or there's plenty of knockoff brands on Amazon that are mimic TRX. That TRX was originally created by a Navy SEAL using parachute straps to mimic the gym environment, using different muscular or joint angles to be able to do a full body workout. So TRX is really good if you're someone who travels often and do not have a gym present. Exercise for the summer, take advantage of the nice weather. Walk or bike at the beach or a boardwalk or parks that we haven't, visited yet. I love looking at Discover Long Island. Discover Long Island always has cool things that they highlight between restaurants and events and parks and things. There's a bunch of other accounts on Instagram like Discover Long Island as well, though. Because sometimes I just get bored of going in my neighborhood and I want to check out some new places and take advantage of living in a beautiful, amazing place, as Long Island is. We can find a gym with air conditioning for sure. Up here at elevation, we do have the AC cranking. Get a buddy, go for a hike, or set up a buddy system. Try out some outdoor yoga on the beach. Just take advantage of things you can't do in the winter, like the paddleboard yoga up at Stony Brook. That's awesome. Swim or tread water if you have joint issues or trying to build up your bones. It's also great for bone building. Depending on where you're at in your physical activity routine and your mobility, the USDA recommends at least 150 minutes a week of cardio activity or aerobic activity that is moderate in intensity, 75 minutes if it's more vigorous. Vigorous, the way you could tell the difference between moderate intensity and vigorous is, say you go to string together 2 sentences and you have to up and inhale to get out those 2 sentences. It's likely a sign your heart rate's elevated into the more vigorous state. But these are just some hikes and places that I like to highlight across Long Island that I really enjoy. Of course, Jones Beach Adventure Park can be a great place with family and friends. Pirates Cove in Port Jeff, Shadmore out in Montauk is steeped in history and connects to Ditch Plains if you can't get a parking spot there because it's only residents. And also it connects you to Camp Hero. So there's a lot of history between Teddy Roosevelt there as well, and the cool geological formations of the hoodoos. They're similar to what you would see in Bryce with hoodoos. So Shadmore is a great place, a great way to get away when Montauk's really crowded and you want to still be in the town. Bayard Cutting Arboretum, or visiting the other arboretums and gardens like Westbury Gardens, for example, Quag Wildlife Preserve, Target Rock, where George Washington brought his troops out in, I want to say, Lloyd Harbor, Sunken Forest in Sailor's Haven of Fire Islands, great place to walk through. But just get out there and explore. It's also good for our mental health and our social connections as well, to come up with fun activities that are different from just going to a restaurant or going out for a drink. Getting a cup of coffee or a tea and going for a walk can be just as great. Moment of perspective for those just getting a little stuck. Nothing changes if nothing changes. We want to try to just pick one small goal at a time, whether we focus in on just the saturated fat at one time or just adding in one high fiber food at a time. But nothing changes if nothing changes. If not now, then when? Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. Your health is your investment, not your expense. Because if you're investing now, the thought is hopefully that we won't have to be investing later. You can't enjoy wealth if you're not in good health. So these are just little fun motivators or mantras that sometimes it's nice to just pick a mantra. For me, stress has been a barrier for me. So I always like to say water off a duck's back when I catch myself, getting too stressed or elevated. But having little isms or mantras can be a great way to keep you moving and motivated towards your goals. But I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you for sitting through today's presentation and coming and signing up. But does anyone have any questions tonight? I'm just going to take a peek at the chat.
I have a question regarding the visceral fat. You can also check it with the scale. They have these scales you can check a bunch of markers with. Do you recommend those?
Yes. So like the Renfro scale you're saying, or like a digital scale that you can get for at home?
Digital scale, yeah.
Oh yeah. So those could be a way. So with the scales, so it's going to be the same technology. It's going to be bioelectrical impedance analysis, but each of those scales, there's ones that could be like $6,000 and then there's ones that are like $50, right? So the more currents or the more points of entry you have on those scales, right, between the hands and feet, the more accurate it's going to be. But it's really good to use those home scales. Like I like to recommend the Renfro brand one off Amazon, just to kind of trend it, right? It might not be exactly accurate, whether it says it's a 10, a 7, a 5, whatever number it is. But then when you're using that scale under similar conditions, so say in the morning, after using the restroom, you can trend the visceral fat. Is it going up or going down? So definitely that could be a good tool, or even like a pair of jeans or a tighter fitting pair of clothing, or pair of pants, I should say.
Thank you.
Of course, anytime. Good question. Very good question. Yes, I'm just looking at the questions in the chat. I'm definitely going to send out the slides. I'm going to let the video process on YouTube. It takes YouTube usually overnight when I upload it for it to process. And then what I'll do is I'm going to send out that YouTube link with the slides and a recipe packet that has like main staples, like grilling options, side options, and healthy like sweet swap options in that recipe packet as well. And everybody who signed up will get that. Does anyone have any other questions or anything that they want to mention? Oh, thank you guys. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful start to your summer. And if you guys ever have any questions, we're a phone call away. You can call us, email us, text us at Functional Nutrition RX, and be on the lookout. We are going to start our Whole30 challenge this Saturday. So if anyone is looking to sign up, please do so. Of course, we're going to be starting soon. And then after, we're going to probably do a mini challenge and another like a hormone guided program, I want to say, not necessarily a challenge afterwards. So be on the lookout, as we're going to be increasing more events and seminars like this. But have a great evening and be well, guys. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good night.